The final thing we need to do now is just tidy up the layout for our individual items. So we can see them there with the image and the two text views, but it looks like there's a few design mistakes. The pictures don't all look the same size. Some of them are wider, some of them are taller, so we need to do something to make them all a fixed size. We have our individual items on a card view, but because there's no space in between the individual items, you can't actually tell that each item is its own card view. In fact, you only really see it at the very bottom, where you get that nice shadow effect. So we need to put some spacing between each individual item. There's some other nice things we can maybe look at doing, like rounding the corners of the image and rounding the corners of the actual card itself. And of course, we need to give our text some gentle styling to make it look clean and modern. So we're going to have a bit of fun now going back to our XML layout code for our item_project. So I'm going to minimize my emulator, and we need to go to the layout code for item_project. So I'm going to do that shift thing. And I'll type item_project and then autocomplete. And we're back in. So the first thing we will do is we will give space between each of the individual items. If you look at the design view on the right, you can see it goes all the way to the edges, and you can't really see any space around it. So there's two types of attribute which can affect space between elements, space between items. One is margin and one is padding. And the subtle difference is layout margin will put space around the item you apply it to. So on card view here, if I make some line breaks, if I give this layout margin, that will put margin around that layout. It refers to the space around that thing. Let me show you. Layout_margin. And I'll just apply the same amount of margin around all sides. I'll do 12 density independent pixels, 12 dp. And if we look to the right, we can just about see there's some space around that now. That's a good amount of space in my opinion. And the other attribute that we could use to control space, slightly different than margin, is padding. And padding puts space inside that element. It squeezes things inside. Except on card view, it's not going to do anything. Card view is a special type of view group, very similar to a frame layout that we haven't seen yet. Really, really basic. And padding is more or less ignored on things that are card views or frame layouts. But you could see the effect of this if I moved it to the relative layout. So I just cut this and put it in a relative layout. And we look to the right, we can see we don't have the space around the item, but it has squeezed things inside. Okay? So with lots of repetition, I'll go over this over and over again. You'll hopefully get the distinction between layout margin, which puts space around the item in question, the item you're dealing with, and then padding, which then squeezes things inside that item. So layout margin will give us the space that we need. If I just put the emulator back on screen now, and if I just move this to the right so we can see the attributes, okay? So we specified a width and a height of 80 dp. And if I look at the pictures on the right, it looks like 80 dp wide and 80 dp high is being respected as a maximum, like it's no more than 80 wide or 80 high. But because the pictures all have slightly different aspect ratios, some are taller, some are wider, and it's trying to be nice and letting us see the whole picture, every corner of it, then the effect we get is it kind of, in some cases, is less than 80 high, or in some cases it's less than 80 wide, okay? And this gives us our kind of inconsistent look there. So there's a new attribute we can use on the image view. Now, before I show you the attribute and show you some of the options we have available, to be able to illustrate these options better, I'm going to change the temporary picture we put, the launcher background, for one of our problem icons, for one of our problem pictures, which looks a bit weird, because actually this launcher background does fit the 80 by 80 perfectly, as it is a square. So if I go to the emulator, I can see this Vin quote. The quote image is slightly problematic. It's far too wide and not high enough, so we get this rectangle that looks a bit weird. So if I go to the source, and I'll change this for quote, and if we look to the right, we can see we have the slightly poorly scaled picture there. So the attribute that we need is simply called scale type with a capital T. And when we autocomplete that, we get a list of some of the options. Now, I'm not going to go through every one of these 8 options we have here. Some of them you will possibly never use. There's 2 or 3 that are kind of useful. By default, the scale type is fit center, this one here. And that does pretty much what it says on the tin. It will fit the image, and that is all of the image, without clipping anything off. It will fit it inside the bounds. It won't perform any sort of scaling or stretching or resizing. And then, of course, if it doesn't quite fit the bounds like our quotes doesn't, then it will just center it inside, whether that's centering it vertically, like the quote picture there, or centering it horizontally. So that's the default scale type if we don't specify anything. Another one that can be useful, although not so much, is the center attribute. Now, if we look what's happened there, we have this very, very large image. This will perform no scaling, which means no resizing. Okay, and this quote image is actually quite big. It's quite a large file. So it will center the image, but it won't scale it. So if you have a very, very large image, you might get something like this, where the image is kept exactly the size as it is, and you only see the center portion. And then conversely, if our image was very, very small, it might be a tiny little image in the middle of this 80 by 80. So center actually isn't that useful unless you've already carefully sized your images. If I just undo that and go back to our options again, another possible scale type you may be interested in is this fit XY. Now what this will do is, it will stretch it to be as high as the container, and it may stretch it to be as wide as the container. But what this will do, if you look at the image, is it will stretch it. Okay, so if you do have some slightly poorly scaled original images, you might get some slightly odd looking stretches going on. Kind of looks okay for our quote app. This would be beneficial if you still wanted to have all of your image, every single little bit of it, but you wanted it to fill the container. So this could possibly be our second best option. So one of the attributes that I find myself using quite a lot, and there is some compromise with it, is center crop. If you look to the right, it's centered, but that leaves some space above. So what it will do is it will gently enlarge the image until it reaches all edges. So imagine now that we're going to zoom in on these quotes. It's already filling the width, so that's okay, but it needs to get a little bit bigger to touch the top and the bottom. So see what happens when I do this? Okay, so that's enlarged a bit. It's not as bad as center when our image was already huge and it just gave us a tiny portion of the image, but we've zoomed in a little bit to fill the height. And of course the width was already filled. So this will give you an effect of an image that hasn't been stretched in any way, an image where it will fill the container, so it will be exactly as high and as wide right to the edges, so all of our icons will fill the same amount of space. And the slight compromise is that you will lose a little bit of your image. It will crop off the edges once it fills the space. You can see that we've lost a little bit of the left and the right. It's been cropped. Either fit center, center crop, or possibly fit XY would be the 3 that I would use most often. And I'd sometimes find myself using center crop the most because we lose a bit of the image, but that's often okay and not much of a problem. Looking where we are now, we have a card view with some nice margin, and we have an icon that will be of consistent size. Before we move on to styling the text, let's do some nice touches to both the card view and the image view to give it some rounded corners. So the card view first. there is an attribute, and it only belongs on the card view, called card corner radius. Now, if I start typing this, card corner radius, we should get the autocomplete with a capital C. And when we do this, you can see it has brought in the app namespace, like we saw earlier on in this course. So this isn't a default Android attribute. This is an extra custom one. So it comes from this app namespace. So it's app : card corner radius. I'm going to auto-format this, so Control-L, Command-Option-L. I like to keep my namespaces together at the top. So this is measured in density-independent pixels, and this will do exactly what you might think. It will apply some rounded corners. So I will give this 6 dp. And it's pretty hard to see with our grey background, but if you look very closely, you can just about see we have a very subtle rounded corner to that. Okay. There's some other useful attributes that belong to the card view. If you want to make the shadow effect more prominent, you can do card elevation, and then we can give a larger value, like 460p. And if you look at this, you can probably see there's more shadow there. In fact, it does look a little bit nicer with a tiny bit more elevation. So let's give it, not 6, that's probably overkill. Let's give it 4 dp. That looks quite nice. Now, there is no attribute for the image view that will give it a corner radius. Later on, I'll do a tutorial on a fancy image library, which will make everything to do with images a lot easier. But until we get there is a hack where you can give the image view some gentle styling. And that hack is simply to put the image view inside a card view. So I will do at the top of the relative layout a card view. And I will make the width and height wrap content. We'll let the image view be in charge of handling the size. So wrap content will be fine. We are going to need to give it an ID, because we're in a relative layout, and we're soon going to put our image view inside this card view. Well, then the two text views need to know how to lay themselves out next to this card view. So I do ID, card _ view _ project _ icon _ container. A nice descriptive ID there. And I'll do a right arrow to close the tag. We'll do the radius in a moment. And I'm going to simply move the image view inside. So Command X, Control X. I'm going to remove the line breaks, and I need to fix these broken IDs. So I'm actually going to copy this new ID, card view project icon container, and just swap it to breaks, and I need to fix it. And I'm going to simply move the image _ container, a nice descriptive ID there. And I'll do a right arrow to close the tag. We'll do the radius in a moment. And I'm going to simply move the image view inside. So Command X, Control X. I'm going to remove the line breaks, and I need to fix these broken IDs. So I'm actually going to copy this new ID, card view project icon container, and just swap it everywhere it was. Okay, if we look to the right, the card view is actually filling the whole space, and that's because we gave the image view 12 dp margin. So let's now give the same margin to the card view, not the image view. And if you look to the right, that fixes our align top thing. Remember, for the app title, we did align top. So it's aligning top to the card view, and the card view now has the margin. So that's looking okay. So I can remove this line break. So now we have the image view in a card view. Watch what happens when we apply card corner radius to this card view. I'll give it the same 6 dp. We get the nice rounded effect. So that is a kind of quick and easy way to give your images some gentle styling. Put them inside a card view. Now, there may be some very subtle elevation, some shadow. Maybe you can't see it because of the elevation on the top card view. But anyway, we don't really want any elevation on the image. We just want to steal the card view's corner radius trick. We don't want any shadow. So to get rid of the shadow, we'll do card elevation and simply do 0 dp. So that'll make sure we don't get any weird looking shadow. From experience, having a shadow effect on another shadow effect, having these multiple layers, part of the material design that is Google's design style, doesn't really look good to have shadow on shadow on shadow. It really confuses the layers to the user. So that's looking pretty good. The final thing we need to do now is just style our text. So if I go down to the two text views, so the first is we will change the font families. I'll make the font family of the title a little bit heavier, a bit more weight. So we'll do sans serif, sans-serif medium, and the text color I'll change as well. So before we actually used our primary color. We used a color set in the app. I think we had a purple one in the restaurant app, our primary color. So now I'm going to set the color manually, and there's multiple ways you can set a color through code, but one is using hexadecimal. This is something you may or may not have seen before. I'll probably do a separate tutorial just briefly covering hexadecimal, but for now you can just copy a hash and then 222222, and that'll give a just off black color. Okay, hexadecimal, that's numbers running from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then A, B, C, D, E, F. So there's 16 characters there, 0 to 9, and then A to F. This is split into R for red, G for green, and B for blue, where 0 is nothing, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 is black, F, 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 F is maximum, which is your white, and then if I do all zeros, and I max out one of these pairs, if I do FF here, we get a red, if I do FF here, we get a green, horrible looking green, horrible FF here, so I do colour, and I don't think not also do 2, and you can say black 9 slightly, and you can click on the little drag there, and see, play with that, do you want, yeah, and you can see how that changes in real time. So you can have a play with that. Now I've given you a very brief introduction to hexadecimal and colours, but the key thing is to do a hash, and then 6 numbers from 00 to FF for each of the RGB. That's our nice grey. Good. We'll make the text size a little larger for the title, so text size 18 SP, remember, scale pixels in case the user enlarges the text on their phone. And then we'll go to our second text view. We'll change the font family to sans serif light, so a slightly less weighty font. We'll leave the text size at the default, which I think is 14 SP. In fact, we'll be explicit, we'll say it just so we can see in code what we've done. And that might be okay with the default colour. You know what, just for fun, we'll specify one. So we want a slightly lighter grey. So we want our grey to be close to the FFFF end, rather than the 000 end. 0's being black, F's being white. So maybe 888888. Yeah, that's a slightly lighter grey. So if I look at this now, I think we're done. Just to recap, we've added corner radius to our card view, and that involved us needing to bring in the app namespace, you know, our custom attributes. Very, very, very common to see this here. Okay, and then we went to our image and we applied a scale type. We covered 2 or 3 of the major ones that you want to know about, and that made sure our image will fit. And then we put the image view actually in a card view, and then we gave this card view some corner radius as well, and that gives us a nice rounded image effect. And then the last thing that we did was we styled our text views. We applied some font families to have a heavier title and a lighter subtitle, a darker grey for the title and a softer grey for the subtitle. and some subtle difference in text size. So let's run this now on our emulator to make sure it looks nice. And when I look at that, I think that looks pretty smart. Rounded corners, nice spacing. In my opinion, actually, it's too much elevation, so I'm actually going to go back now and remove the elevation from the top level card and go with the default. In my opinion, that's just a little bit too much. You are free to use whatever you would like. You might like the extra shadow. But if I just go and remove the line completely, and do auto format to bring the code nice and tidily together, and then what I can do, actually I've not shown you this yet, rather than clicking this rerun button, the one to the right of pixel 2, which is in place of our play button, you can do the one with an A, which actually will apply changes without actually restarting the app. So if possible, rather than starting the app again, it will just update in real time. So let's do the apply, rerun, restart button. And you can see quite quickly it just removed that elevation. A little bit gentler, a little bit softer, better in my opinion, but you are free to do whatever you want there. Either way, we've now got a really professional and smart looking layout, which is fantastic. We are completely done with our portfolio app for now. As far as we're concerned, it is finished. We have all of our apps or projects showing in the list, and the design is nice the way we want it. This tutorial focuses on one final bonus feature to do with the layout files, which is a very, very useful thing when we're designing and trying to flesh out our layouts. To show you this new feature, I'm going to head over to my browser, and I'm going to search for Android Tools namespace, and search. And right at the top here, we have this Tools Attributes reference. Okay, and if we look at this here, Android Studio supports a variety of XML attributes in the Tools namespace. You can see it here, that enable design time features, or compile time behaviors. When you build your app, the build tools remove these attributes, so there's no effect on your APK size or runtime behavior. Okay, so what this means is, we have some features that will help us out when we're designing. We will see it in the design preview, but when we actually build our app or compile it or turn it into the actual app or the file, it does not get included at all. Okay, so these are features that are only there to help us design, but have no impact on what actually shows in the app, okay? So let me show you how useful this is right now. So I've just got open the two layout files, itemproject.xml and activity_main.xml. If you can go to activity_main now, okay, we just have a recycler view. But if we look in the design preview, well, it's just got this default item 0, item 1 thing. We're not seeing our layout. There actually isn't an Android or an app attribute to say what the layout is. You know that we do that using an adapter, okay? So there's nothing that we can really put in the recycler view that gives it the layout. That's the adapter's job. But there is a tools namespace, a tools attribute, which will do this for us. Make a line break somewhere in the middle of the recycler view, and start typing with a lowercase t the word tools, T-O-O-L-S, and then a colon. And at the point where you do the colon, you should be prompted with an autocomplete, Alt-Enter or Option-Enter. So if I press Alt-Enter now as prompted, okay, that brings in this brand new namespace. XML namespace, XML ns : tools, and then it's the same schemas.android.com / and then tools. And this will give us lots and lots of attributes that just help us when we're designing. And for recycler view, it gives us the very useful attribute list item. And now I can give this a layout. I can do @layout, and I can give it item_project. And when I do this, let's see what happens. So we can see in main activity in this design preview what our recycler view might look like with our new layout. Isn't that fantastic? Okay, so this tools namespace has no impact when you actually build the app. It won't do anything to our code. It won't be there at all when we run the app, but it does help us in our design preview. Okay, and that is its sole purpose. If I go over to item_project now, okay, and we have the image view where we gave it a template drawable. Now, the problem is here is we're actually setting a real drawable on this image view to then swap it out in our adapter. So doing this is actually a waste of performance power. We're loading this quote drawable for every single item, for every single image view in our recycler views list, to then swap it out. So we can simply change the word Android for the word tools. Okay, if I press escape, and then I get the prompt to autocomplete that. So Alt-Enter, Option-Enter, whatever it is for the Mac. And then if I go to the top, I can see it's brought in the tools namespace. In fact, I'll do Control-Alt-L or Command-Option-L to auto-format that. I like to keep the namespaces together. So if I go back to my image view now, we still see the drawable, the quote image there. If I remove this, we see nothing, we have an empty frame, okay? But the difference with the tools namespace is this will not be included when we run the app. So when we load this item_project layout in our recycler view adapter, there will be no default image loaded. This will be taken out. It'll be like this, empty, okay? So we get a performance boost right there. The other place we can use this is for our text views. You can see we're getting a warning telling us we shouldn't really be hard coding the words here. We should use a string resource. But to be honest, we don't want to be setting text at all, because it will set the text for all of these items in the recycler view for us to then change it anyway in the adapter. It will happen so fast you won't see this. It won't be visible to the user. But there's a slight performance problem there. And if you think back to our BMI calculator where we had the result text view, well, we actually put some dummy text in our layout, and we actually had the problem where it was showing on the screen. We had to go back and delete that. But then, of course, we couldn't see it in our design preview. So this is the purpose of the tools namespace. And pretty much anything that starts with Android can be replaced with the word tools. So if I type the word tools here, the error goes away because we're not actually setting the text. But if I look to the right, I still see the text. Of course, if I delete this, we get nothing, so it doesn't really help us design. So this is the purpose of the tools namespace, and it's super useful just for fleshing out some dummy text while we're designing our project, and then of course we set it in code later on, so it doesn't matter. Okay? So if you ever want to have some placeholder images or placeholder text, or show in the recycler view the actual item layout you're going to be using, as well as many, many other things, type the word tools in a colon, and then do Alt-Enter or Option-Enter to bring in this tools namespace, XML ns : tools, and this will give you all of these things to help you design while having no impact on the code.